Mike Radich here, and I'm now joined on the phone by MMA fighter and personality, Robin Black. Robin, how are you?
Hey man, doing real good, thanks.
Robin, the Score is no more. Score Fighting Series shut the doors. Rogers, they shut them down. As a guy who's been there from the beginning, you called every single fight, you broke down every single fight. What does the Score mean to you, and how devastating is this for you that the Score is not around anymore?
Yeah, man, it sucks bad. Like, straight up, you know. It was really an awesome thing to be a part of. Like, you had the feeling from early on that, you know, we were getting into that role where, you know, that space right underneath Bellator, where there's, you know, 4 or 5 good, large size, you know, TV product MMA shows, with good young fighters and like a lot of excitement around it and stuff. We were kind of, you know, quickly getting into that area. You know, with cool young fighters like, you know, your Jesse Ronsons, who just looked amazing last fight, and Ricci and Josh Hill, you know, guys like Carvalho's last fight before the UFC, Nick Bonilla signed straight out of the UFC, straight from there to the UFC. There's like, you know, Alessio went right from there. There was 5 or 6 guys. You know, I was in touch with Sean Shelby quite a bit, and they were watching every show because they knew that, you know, we had a level of quality of guy there that, you know, with a couple wins they could go right there. It was fun, man, working with Chevallo and working with Morrow. I just loved it. It was my favorite gig I've ever had. It's going to be a shame to not get to do it.
Now, could you just clear the air a little? Because there's been rumors around there that Score was losing money, and that's why Rogers shut them down. What exactly happened with them? Why did this go out of business?
Yeah, you know, man, people don't like seeing other people do well. That's really sad. Like, it's just sad reality of the world. You know, you go on the internet and somebody's doing something good and they seem happy, and a bunch of people who live in a hole, you know, want to pull everybody else down there. And that's who did well. You know, Brendan Fife, who ran it, to me was probably the smartest guy I've ever worked with or close to, and the hardest worker. And he built a structure of a show that really, quite simply, you know, broke even. That was the goal for it. You know, if you would do 1,800 seats in those small shows, it would be a break-even proposition. And it was a separate company from the Score. The Score Fighting Series was its own corporate entity. So the Score Fighting Series was a break-even thing that cost nothing, except for the Score paid the salaries of people that work there. And the benefit of the company was that the Score got to give them free television advertising, a free TV home, so the whole thing was shot by the Score. You know, and free in-house design and art and all of those little things you get by being part of a network. So it was a perfect scenario. It literally would have run forever. You know, you had an expert in Brendan and a small team of people that surrounded him that made the show successful. The Score Television Network, it cost them, you know, essentially nothing, and they got free TV content that they owned for life. So everyone was happy. It would have literally lasted forever. And then Rogers came in and bought the Score. And I knew the day that I heard that it's probably a matter of time, that we may never do another show. You just know how these big, you know, if Walmart buys a small chain, everything changes, right? Right. And it's that kind of deal. It's business. You've got like a monopoly, you know, or a near monopoly. You've got, well, in Canada, all we have is Rogers and Bell. Those are essentially the 2 television companies. And the Score was one of this handful of other companies outside of that. When Rogers bought the Score, you knew that there was trouble. And Rogers and Sportsnet is the exclusive home of the UFC in Canada. So all of a sudden, now you're owned by a company that shows the UFC. What are the chances that they're going to air it? So Rogers just didn't need it. I mean, they're sitting there, there's 6 or 8 UFC shows. There's Ultimate Insider and all these UFC shows, and Rogers doesn't even air all of that. So if they're not airing all of their exclusive UFC content, chances are they're like, why would we waste our time on this small thing? And that's kind of how it went down. So you had a very successful company doing a very successful show, doing really cool stuff. Everybody was happy. The fighters were happy. We were having fun. The fans loved it. And then it got bought by a big company, and that was the end.
Was there any way possible that you said Score Fighting Series was a separate entity than Score, the network? Was there any possibility that it could just break off and just be Score Fighting Series and not have anything to do with Rogers? Was that ever in the cards?
Well, when Rogers bought the Score, they bought 3 of the Score was 4 businesses. It was the Score, and it was Score Mobile, and it was Score Fighting Series, and one other, I can't remember. And they bought everything except for Score Mobile. So they purchased it with a purpose this. We talked about it in our upside of with sitting around kind of looking at it and sitting over a beer and talking to a small group of us who've been there since the beginning. We were like, well, the good thing is they purposefully bought it. And one of the conversations that was happening, Tom Wright from the UFC had looked at potentially creating a UFC Canada show.
Right.
It was small level conversations about a grassroots UFC Canada owned product, and that is from what I heard, one of the reasons they bought the Score Fighting Series. And late, maybe like November or something, I saw in some interviews in MMA Junkie, he said just flat out, yeah, we were looking at doing our own Canadian series, and we've decided not to do that. And the day I read that, I thought, we're screwed. This is done. But they definitely considered it. And so then you're Rogers, and you're like, yeah, we also own this thing. You're in the middle of doing $100 million business transfer with, NBA and WWE and all these gigantic things on their list of the 100 biggest important priorities to, what to do with the network, all the staff. If you wrote a list of their 100 priorities of that buyout, I don't think the Score Fighting Series would have made the top 100. So while they're sitting around trying to figure out what to do with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property, they're like, oh yeah, just cut this thing. We don't need this. And that's kind of really how it happened.
Now,
it's all business talk. Business, talking about business and monopolies and corporate world is a lot less interesting than talking about fighting. But I'm an analyst who's kind of obsessed with everything around fighting, so I want to understand everything. So I want to understand how the business works too. So I did my digging, and that's how it went down.
Right, and I love hearing it too. Like I love hearing the background stuff because it is a business, and MMA it's crazy because there's so many businesses inside the business. It's just fantastic. Yeah.
And you know what? Speaking of business, we live in this bubble. You're interested in it. I'm interested in it in this aspect of it. But we live in a bubble where we're like, oh my God, okay, Score Fighting Series was purchased. We think MMA is big, but to regular TV guys, 50-something-year-old television executives wearing a suit and tie who've been in it for 35 years, on the list, MMA is somewhere around BMX in their mind. You know what I mean?
Sure.
To them, it's literally garbage. It's our life, and we're obsessed with it. But, I've explored TSN at different times and talked to some executives over there, and those guys, to them, they would never dream of getting in the MMA business. They just never would. To those older, that old level of executives, there's just no way.
Now, how big of a gap has Score left? How big of a blow is this? Because, there's MFC up in Canada right now. They're doing some good things. Instinct MMA, I don't know what their deal is. I think their owner, he got sick or something. They had to cancel a bunch of shows. I don't know what their deal is. How big of a gap did Score leave in the MMA business?
Well, the only way a business is going to be successful is if there's a need for it, right? You can't go and create a Score and force it to work. It works if there's a need for it. And the fact that it worked means there was definitely a need. There were what the hell is these... like I said, the same guys, Josh Hills and Jesse Ronsons and Elias Theodoros and all these, all these great fighters. Why are they available? It's because there's nowhere for them to fight.
Right.
And John Fraser and all these guys, there's nowhere for them to fight. And the Score could pay guys, not pretty huge money, but I don't know what John Fraser got paid. That's not my area.
Sure.
But I'd have to think it was $4 or $5 grand plus ticket sales, which isn't a bad thing if you're fighting 3 or 4 times a year. You might add $25,000 to your year with sponsorships and stuff. So for a guy like that, those guys are there. And they need fights. There's an audience in Ontario, not a huge one, to be honest. It's not a huge built-in grassroots MMA audience, but the Score took on the role of trying to build that. And, there was obviously a television demand of this sort of... I looked at us like the AHL or college football, And in America, there's an enormous demand for college football. In Canada, we were proving there was a bit of a television demand for grassroots MMA. So there was a need. And when it's gone, that need reappears. There's all these guys. I know, all those guys that we, had on the show, your Lyndon Whitlocks and your Alex Ricci's and these, Will Romero's and these good stud young guys. They need fights now. And now NFC has been a long-standing, high-quality show. Good television product. It's a good place for guys. And I work closely with a few of these guys. They're close friends. And I've kind of managed guys for sort of no money, just kind of helped it out because I love the business and stuff. So, I'd look at an Alex Ricci or a guy like that going out there. AFC Aggression,
sure.
They've done really well. You know, they're growing. They have shows in different cities now. You know, so guys like that, maybe they wouldn't pay quite as much because it's not Ontario, but guys can find some fights out there, and they can get Calgary, Victoria. They're planning to come out to Quebec as well, from what I hear. You mentioned Instinct. Stéphane Patry owns Instinct. He was George St. Pierre's first manager, and he owned TKO. He knows the business, but what I hear, he did get sick, but what I hear is his investors, after the first few shows, you know, MMA shows will lose money, even quality ones, for the first 3 or 4 shows.
Right.
And his guys lost money, and I don't think they want to be losing money forever, so some of them pulled out. So it's a bit of a complex business, and it's not necessarily the highest level, smartest business minds that are driven to do it. A lot of times it's guys who like excitement and guys who like the sport and guys who maybe don't understand some of the challenges of the business. So you see a lot of these, you know, where Brendan Fife from The Score, this guy spent 3 years researching the business by just airing shows. So we would air other people's shows on The Score, and we'd all go out, me and Ed Caparici and Brendan and a few other guys, and we all learned every aspect of the business for 3 years. And that's the kind of research you really need to do. A lot of new guys just pop up, put on a show, and want to learn on the fly, but learning on the fly means you lose $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a show at first, and most people can't do that.
Now, Robin, for you, what are some of your favorite moments from The Score? Some of your favorite fights? Maybe not a fight, but just, you know, somebody that you loved watching in The Score and just, you know, seeing them develop and get to the next level, or, you know, just a great performance of theirs. You know, what are some of the memories that you always have with you from The Score?
But there's quite a few of them. I mean, people use the term, it's like a family. They say that about a lot of things, but The Score really started to be that way because, you know, none of us were making all that much money, you know. I was probably paid the level of like an undercard fighter to call the fights, and, you know, we'd spend weeks and weeks analyzing them, calling, get to know, I'd go out to their gyms and train with some of these guys. Really wanted to try to do the best job you could for them, really know them and know their coaches and stuff. So you got to know them personally. So you have this investment, and like when Will Romero would celebrate a win, you know, you really feel for him how passionate he was about it. And I had guys that are very close personal friends. And, you know, you go to call, Nick Denis is one of my closest friends, and I actually got him his UFC contract. And, you know, he's a close friend, and you go to call these fights, and, you know, me helping other guys, like helping Nick or being friends with these guys, I took it as a huge thing. Like, I can't ever overstate them when I call fights, because calling fights to me is the greatest fucking privilege. Like, and it's the coolest job. It's really the first thing in my life I've ever felt like I'm really good at, and I love doing it. So I was going to call my friends fights and have to reel it in. So even if, let's say, Alex Ricci's a good friend, he's fighting Tim Smith, I would watch back that show, and I spent more time talking about how tough Tim Smith was and how great he was, how great his chin was and how big his heart was, than Ricci and how much work he was doing. But during those, sometimes you'd lose control, like when Nick Denis picked up and choke slammed Nick the Malice right in front of us. It was me and John Ramdine. And, you know, Nick was losing the fight, and you're calling, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he comes up behind the Malice, explodes in with hip pressure. He just, like, sort of a Olympic lift type hip explosion, and just slams him unconscious. And we went crazy. And then that night, you see Nick, and he's happy, and I realized, because I've been talking to Sean Shelby for him, and I realized, holy fuck, Nick, you just slammed him. You just slammed yourself into the UFC tonight, because Sean was watching. And I knew you choke slam a guy when you have all the intangibles and the excitement of Nick, and all his fights were knockout wins. You know you're going to the UFC. So it was really exciting for him. You know, Ricci had a couple of great knockouts. Lyndon Whitlock's knockout with that crazy overhand right during the kick. There were just so many. I mean, oh, man, Sergey Yuskevich. Did you see that fight?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, man. Who was it he was fighting again? Man, my brain is just, I've been looking at UFC 157 all day. But, you know, they just went, like, there was just so many. Like, it was such a great show. And it was, you know, I would sit down and I'd look to my left, and there's Mauro Ranallo doing his Mauro Ranallo talk. Or, you know, when I first worked with Chevalo, I'm a huge fan of his as well. And we were doing the live thing, and, you know, and I just got all worked up doing the live feed, like, where you kick off the show. and he looks at the camera and he goes, "My broadcast partner, Robin Black, is so excited his hair is standing on end."
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is the most fun I've ever had. It was really, really exciting. And I do get to call a ton of other shows, but I missed that one bad. It was such a special show.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think the legacy of Score Fighting Series is? Do you think it has a legacy? It kind of seems like, it was here and now it's gone. It's a very short time. What do you think the imprint it left in the sport?
I think the reality is there's not going to be much memory of it in a couple of years. Right. I think that's the reality. The people who fought there, the people who were at those events, those of us who worked on it will know that it was quite special, and we could go through our lives and not necessarily. I'm hopeful that there'll be shows as good, better, and work for organizations that you're even more excited to work for. I'm really hopeful of that. But I also know that was a very special thing. We all became extremely close friends. We would talk to Brendan or Woody or Alex, or the key guys. We'd be talking at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and then sleep for 2 hours, and then again at 8 a.m. working on this stuff. And we all committed 3 or 4 years of our lives to making that thing work.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know that people will remember it. I really don't. But I know that its mark was it got 6 or 7 guys to that next Canadian guys to that next step in the UFC. And guys like Mitch Gagnon fought there. Then that he didn't fight his last fight there, but it was part of his path to get there. Nick Cavallo. So many guys. Clements beating Clementi. That was in Sarnia, in an amazing fight. His next fight was in the UFC. There were so many guys like that, and I think getting those guys there, helping on MMA break a little more in Ontario, showing Canadian people that there are top-level young guys developing here, and even, showing the UFC. I would talk to them about the guys that we had, they would realize, holy shit, there's something legit going on up there. So I think that's the mark it'll make, but ultimately, I can't imagine it's going to be talked about a year from now, and that's really sad, but I think that's the reality of things, things move on, and you look for the next thing, you hope to be a part of something else good, and that's just how it is. Now
it's transitioned to you. What does this do for your career now? You don't have this gig anymore. Obviously, you're working with the Fight Network up in Canada. Do you go to fighting now? Do you try to pursue that a little bit more? Where exactly do you go now?
I'm too old, man. I was never a high-level fighter, and but I learned a lot about it. And I'm an analyst, and I'm a color commentator. Mm-hmm. And that's I sung in a rock band, I've done television, I've done a lot of stuff. And this is really the thing where I look and I go, I'm not bad at this. This can be sort of the best work I've done in my life. I talk a lot. I learned to write poetry and be poetic and try to use excitement and words and stuff. And when I was in music, and that works when calling fights, my enthusiasm's high, and learning to fight and learning the aspects, all of the things that I've done over the last 20 years of my life experience, it works for that. And I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm a lot of people, not a lot of people's, I think, but that I'm good at, and I know I'm good at it, and I love doing it. I get up in the morning and I'm pumped. Like today, I'm at Fight Network, and we're going to do the setup for the 157 weigh-ins. Mm-hmm. And, then we'll analyze post-fight. And being able to get the gift of being able to watch these fights, talk about them on Monday morning, every day, all week, being able to analyze and talk about fighting, that's exciting to me. And I call Deep, the English broadcaster, Deep, and I call Jules, the English broadcaster, Jules, and we call, a whole bunch of Canadian shows. I've been talking to Besson. They've mentioned that they'd really like me to do some commentary on their show. So I think commentary is going to be, it's what I'm going to keep pursuing. Mm-hmm. The Score was by far my biggest gig, and I got to work with top guys, and it felt like I held my own. It felt like I brought something different, my enthusiasm, and I learned the guys, and, I always sold the sport because I'm the biggest fan. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'll keep pursuing. I'll keep looking around and doing the smaller shows until, hopefully another Score-size show or bigger pops up one day. But this is what I'll always be doing. And fighting-wise, I won 4 out of 9 fights. Mm-hmm. My last fight I won, and I was really, really excited. But I'm 43 years old, and I've never been anywhere near, a mid-level guy.
Sure.
I was thrilled with my last fight because it's the first time I was really, really poised and really calm, and I heard everything. I was able to make really good decisions, and I stuck with the game plan. I controlled my heart rate and my thinking. And that, to me, was the big experience I think I needed to have to really understand when I'm calling fights. Really not be in there and go crazy and scrap it out and maybe you win, but go in there and break it down analytically and not get worked up and not, control your emotions and your thinking. That's what I got to do in my last fight. And, I may not fight again. I was planning to, but I got a little injury and I can't spar for 3 months. I'm 43, so I don't really... I'd love to fight forever, but you're pushing your luck when you're in your 40s, and little things start breaking down, and it's kind of spooky. So.
Mm-hmm. And nothing music-wise? Do you have a band anymore? Anything going on that front?
I do get together with my friends sometimes, the guys I used to play with once or twice a year. But this is, the last 5 or 6 years, MMA has been my life. It's like I really wanted to do good by it. I really wanted to be a good commentator and make sure that those fighters, when they went back and watched the fights, were like, man, Robin Black understands us, and he understands how hard this is and how much we want it, and understands the sport. I wanted to do that. And that to be, everybody watches TV. I mean, there's Mr. Bauer was talking to me about it. It's like, there's trolls out there for everything, right? Mm-hmm. But he is an expert who's been calling fights for 10 years, who, is good at his job, and he gets dozens and dozens and dozens of people will text, knocking him. But the thing that they're implying is that they could do it. They could do his job. They'd be great at it. But, that's just people who are stupid. I mean, it's not just being somebody who understands fighting. You have to learn broadcasting, you have to learn to use your voice, you have to learn train of thought, process, improvisation, all of this stuff. It's real, true skills. And being an expert, and knowing the who's who and how they train and the sport itself. There's a billion things, and you'll never get good enough at them. And the only way to do it is to be all day, all the time, for a decade. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, that's all I do. I get up in the morning and I take the news of the day in. Mm-hmm. And then I go and do my first training session, and I try to learn further, really understand. I train with Billy Martin, who's a top-level boxer. He's trained world champions and elite guy. And I'll go in on a Monday, and say, okay, this weekend George was implementing this jab, and he was landing because of this. I will do my training so that I can understand it. Mm-hmm. So I go work at a Fight Network all day long. I'm still absorbing stuff, researching other things, maybe call some fights from Japan or from somewhere else. Go for my second training session where wrestling or jiu-jitsu will break down the same thing. We saw this weekend. What does it mean? Try to understand it. Go home and do that all night. I try to give my wife, some amount of hours where I turn off the phone and I'm not on the computer. Mm-hmm. And then I get up tomorrow and I do the same thing, and I've been doing that for 5 years. So there's not really time for music or any of these other things. If you really want to do good at something that requires that level of expertise, you have to dedicate every minute to it. Mm-hmm.
Now, which do you prefer? Would you prefer to be cage side calling the fights as a color commentator, or would you rather be in studio like what you're doing now for the Fight Network? What do you prefer?
I do really enjoy the analysis. Mm-hmm. Particularly, we do, on Fight Network, we do a live, just the Canadian shows right now, but the second, is it 158 in Montreal? Yeah, 158. Yeah. So the second 158 is done, we'll go live in the studio. Mm-hmm. And we'll go, okay, oh my God, George St. Pierre defended his title, and we will break it down in the second. And in that moment, you've just been sitting there absorbing it, and you get inspired by the greatness that you see in fighting, by guys digging deep and being inspired in the moment. Doing analysis is amazing. Mm-hmm. Like if if I can sit on a desk for Fight Network or for anybody. But I love it here. I do. I really love it here because I get to work with Red Dean and Pollock and good people. But to be able to, right after, in the moment, analyze, to me, is magical. But at the same time, if you told me I could only do one thing, I would sit beside a cage with Michael Chiavello or other greats. And I really enjoyed working with Michael because he gave me so much. He tried to mentor me a little and gave me advice and stuff. Moro did the same thing, and I think Moro's a genius. Ramdeen is one of my best friends, and I think he's an incredibly underrated commentator, and he's probably the guy I work best with. But sitting beside a cage with someone like that, watching two great athletes who dedicated their whole lives to being able to strive for this win in front of a live crowd, that to me is the greatest experience I've ever had. And fighting and winning in a good fight is a very close second. I've sung in a rock band in like 20,000 people and like most of an amphitheater and shit, and this is better. Like sitting beside a cage during these great moments and trying to enrich the viewer's experience by talking and explaining and delving deep and going for it, that to me is the greatest thing. And it was a dream to get to do it, and the fact that I get to do it sometimes still blows my mind, and it will for the rest of my life.
Do you ever get nervous?
Fucking greatest. What's that?
Do you ever get nervous?
I get nervous. I got really nervous during the score shows when, like, everything's fine, and you do the undercard, and it's no problem. And both, the experts, like Morrow and John and Michael, they, taught me that you wanted the excitement to grow. So you never do a second-rate job on the undercards, but you just can't get to 10 yet, or else you're going to harm the viewers. If you're on 10 from fight number 1 on the main event, you're not going to be able to give them that lift that they're seeking, right? Right. So they taught me that. And everything's fine. You're doing the undercard, and it's going well, you're having fun, and then they take the intermission, and everybody's excited, and you stand off to the side. And with Michael was when I was really noticed this. You stand off to the side, and they've got the camera, and you did a little rehearsal earlier, and they put these hot lights on you, and you're ready to go. It's live, and it was live on Access TV, and apparently there was like 200,000 viewers in the States and stuff. And they put these lights on you, and then they run this, the intro tape, right? So it's a million highlights, and the music is building, and the volume is building, and the crowd is going crazy, and that's designed to raise, any smart, clip editor, those guys, they're experts in their own right, and they're designing that to create excitement. They're designing it to make your heart rate go up and get everyone pumped. Well, I'm watching it too. So I'm getting all pumped up, and so you start seeing 10, 9, 8, or whatever, there's a little countdown on the thing, and all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, okay, it's happening, and you get worked up, and you're about to go live on TV, and I get nervous then. And in fact, I get nervous to the point where in both the ones I did with Michael, I put a chair behind me, and I put the flat of my hand on the chair while I did the thing, just in case I wobbled or slipped. Like, you get it's live TV, it's a really exciting thing. And, it's better now, because on Fight Network, we do live TV almost every event. So now you're really used to it. But it's that giant, epic, countdown, loud sound, it's happening, here we go vibe. That gets you pretty nervous. Not as nervous as a fight, but nervous.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now let's transition to some current MMA topics. First, I got to ask you about UFC 157. Obviously, you're going to be breaking this down for a long time, basically. You're going to be breaking this one down for a while. So, just a brief overview of the event, if you could.
Okay, well, obviously, it's the first women's fight ever in the UFC, and that's a big deal. And it would be a big deal no matter what. But what makes it interesting to me is two things about Ronda Rousey. And those are it's a rare thing where you get these two things together. She's a superstar, okay? She would be a star if she was the finalist of the next Great Baker, or if she was on So You Think You Can Dance, or, she'd be a star however you put her in front of people. And because she's got that kind of thing, my wife works in musical theater, and when they're describing it, all of the people who work on Broadway are great, but some of them, they say they have that sparkle, where it's like there's 20 Broadway greats, but for some reason, when one of them walks out, everybody, their mouths open and their eyes bug out, and she has that. And so that's a legitimate thing. That's a real thing, and we're all interested in her because of it. But I think she has it so much that I think we forget, when we're talking about her, that she also appears to be potentially, a 1 in a million athlete. And I say that, obviously obviously, judo is an extremely tough sport. She's an Olympic-level judo player, so she can perform under pressure, which is, I don't know if Liz Carmouche is going to fold, but you sure as hell could in the main event of a UFC fight, and you won't see that out of Rousey. That's just not going to happen. But skill-wise, I mean, I wasn't a believer. I thought, it was some hype, that it's easy to get behind her because she's beautiful and she's a star. But when she did to Sarah Kaufman, people, even Sarah after the fight, Sarah was like, oh, I'm not having my performance, I'm embarrassed, whatever. Right. But Sarah is one of the greatest female fighters on the planet. And she went over there. And it's not that Sarah did something wrong, and I think that's what she maybe didn't realize. It was that she just played against Michael Jordan. Or she just played potentially golf against, Tiger Woods. This girl went across, and she got hold of her. Then she put her into a position. Then she threw her. Then she got the arm, and then she, and each of those things in a fight, when if I'm fighting another low-level guy, the reason I can't do those things is each step is a fight. I want his hand. Well, he doesn't want me to have his hand. So I have to win that fight. Then I got to put my hip in against him against the fence. Well, he knows that. He doesn't want me to have that. So he fights that hip. And then you get the underhook and you want to throw as you drive your hip out. He knows there's a fight at every single step of this process. And it's a fight that against 99% of the women, Sarah wins that fight at each one of these. But this animal was able to go in and win 6 little battles in a row and finish this girl who's probably the number 2 or number 335 pounder in the world. And at that moment, and she did it with this Mike Tyson-like, look in her eyes where she's like, I'm going over there, I'm going to grab this bone, I'm going to rip it apart, and I'm going to celebrate. And she did it. And that, I became a believer instantly. I was like, all I kept saying, Landine was at my house, and I jumped up, and I paced around drinking a beer, and I just kept saying, holy shit, it's real. This girl's real. This isn't just a beautiful chick who's a star. This is the real thing. And at that moment, I realized, man, this is pretty cool. So that's what's happening. That's why it's a big deal. We're all kind of forgetting as we're talking about women in MMA and this girl being a star, but we're forgetting that I think the biggest piece of information is this girl could be, that elite, that Michael Jordan level in her own world. In the world of women's fighting, she could be Michael Jordan. And we'll see. So that's exciting. I think Dan Henderson against Machida is pretty interesting. Henderson always drives forward and always looking for his head overhand right. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because when you're great at one thing, you can make it work over and over. That's fantastic. But Machida's game is disengage and control distance, cause you to chase him, and then do that for a while until you get reckless with it and make you pay with a straight left hand. And you don't have to do nothing to get Dan Henderson to chase you. So it's basically, can Dan Henderson, despite the fact that he's walking into Machida's game, make his work? Is what he does in chasing and attacking better than everybody else that Machida has made pay for that? And Machida's like, well, I know my game. It's going to be there for me, and I'm going to try it. So I think potential. I love Dan Anderson. He's probably one of my favorite fighters ever. But I don't see how, if this fight was fought 10 times, I think Machida would win it 6 or 7 times. But hey, I'm like a weatherman. I could be wrong.
Sure.
I'm wrong probably as often as I'm right. The most you can hope to do is create a conversation. And even if people go, "That Robin Black's an idiot," well, you still did your job. You still got people thinking about it and talking about it, and looking at different variables in it, and shit like that used to bug me, and now I kind of realize, like, pushing some buttons and making people argue against you, you still enrich their experience, and that's kind of your gig. Right.
And now, the UFC, they've been cutting guys. They cut 16 guys. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. I don't remember the exact day when that list came out, but they cut 16 guys. Dana White said the bleeding hasn't even begun yet. 100 more fighters will be let go. Before we get to the guys who were cut, how about these guys that are the Jesse Ronsons, the Josh Hills, who built themselves up and now they're right there? They should be getting that call from Joe Silva or Sean Shelby, but right now with the UFC cutting all these guys, what happens to them? If you're their manager or whatever, what are you doing right now? Because you're not going to get that call.
I'm getting them to fight. I'm not getting guys sitting. You get a guy sit 6 months, and all of a sudden now, the thing is this, man, people don't realize that when you're, I'm helping out a couple of fighters, and keeping my fingers. I like to stay involved in that because I like to help people. I like to feel like we had contributed, but I also love to understand the business through that door. And right now, let's say, I was talking to a buddy of mine today, and he's like, he called it the Mitch Clark route, which I think is unfair, because I think Mitch is a great fighter. Mitch was 8-0 or 9-0, and most of his fights were against guys that didn't have the biggest records. Whatever, man. Mitch got there. He's a great fighter. He trains really hard, and he's probably going to win his next fight, and this will all be forgotten. But to use that example, people will then go, oh man, all I need to do is build my record up. And we started looking, and there's in the hundreds of 155-pound fighters that are 6-0 or better. 6-0, 7-0, 8-0, 8-1, 10-1. There's literally hundreds of them. So you're not getting in anymore just by being some 8-0 kid with a manager that people know. They're getting rid of 100 guys. You've got 200 other guys to compete with, all who have good records. It's not happening. You need to make these young fighters understand you are, it's no longer, oh man, let's just get to the UFC and start competing. You're competing now, and that's why that college football analogy was so good. College football's awesome because these guys play with this desperation. If they make the NFL, they will marry supermodels, drive sports cars, buy houses for their parents, and all this kind of shit. In the meantime, you play like your life depends on it. And that's what level of fighting is getting to outside the UFC. You got to beat people. You can't just numbers. You have to beat other guys. If Joe Silva's looking at somebody and you hear that, you have to go beat him. So I would get these. Jesse Ronson should be in the UFC right now. Jesse Ronson looked fantastic against Ryan, who is a killer. Healy. He is a killer. He's tough and rugged, and Jesse just looks great against him. But there's no space right now, so he's got to fight. And I know Jesse, and Jesse's looking for fights. He's smart. He gets it. It's like you need these guys who this is their life for the next 15 years. Not guys like, man, if I can just make the UFC and fight there twice, maybe I'll get more members in my gym. Those guys, there's no place for them anymore. You need these young, desperate, hungry monsters. And if you're not one of those guys, if you're one of those guys, fuck it, I'm fighting everybody. I'll fight every weekend. Those are the guys you need. So these young guys, they need to go fight. And they need to be patient. I mean, the things ebb and flow, and right now they're in the cutting thing. But when Nick Denis got in there, just as an example, Nick, I talked to Sean. He loved Nick. He's like, hey, man, this guy got 8 knockouts. He fought in Goku. I love him. He's like, but we just had the Ultimate Fighter 135 and 145-pound house. I've got 8 new bantamweights, and I got no room. Nick went, and he took a tough fight against a tough guy, and he knocked him out in an exciting way. Hey, man, I don't care how many guys you have. If you just found a guy with 9 knockouts, his last one was the choke slam that's all over the internet, you will sign them. So these guys have got to be hungry and go out and strive for it and earn it. And the guys that do that are going to be the guys that will get signed to the UFC and fight in the UFC no matter what.
Now, what about some of these other organizations that are out there that are trying to, get some more exposure and get some more high-level talent? If you're a promoter right now, what are you doing? Are you looking to sign all these guys that are, those fringe guys who are saying, hey, I'm one fight away, or I should be getting a call right now? What are you doing if you're a promoter right now?
Well, that's a tricky thing. The Bellator is in a position to compete with the UFC somewhat. I mean, they got the money. Viacom has the money. They're doing 800,000 people a week. Every week, they're in a position to grow. But, you need names people recognize. And, they're saying they're not interested in Fitch, but I'm hearing that they're already having conversations with Fitch. And, I mean, you need him. Like, why wouldn't you go and sign John Fitch? People know his name. You can sign him a little bit less. And, you go and you sign that guy. The World Series of Fighting is another one that looks cool, and Ray Cephalo's like a great fighter, and he's brilliant. But is there enough fighters out there for those guys to create 6 shows a year? There may not be enough known fighters. So if that's the case, you want maybe some of these Alex Ricci, Josh Hill, Jesse Ronson. You want some of these types, and now it depends on your business model. You may have to sign Jesse Ronson if I was his manager. I'm not, but if I was, I would say he'll sign 2 fights with you. And you have to be willing to do that because he wants to go to the UFC. He's willing to fight twice. If he wins them both, he knows he'll be there. If you try to convince him to sign a 4 or 5 fight contract, he's not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? He
Right.
won't do it. So you have to be prepared to be flexible for some of these shows. But let's see. There's you know, it's such a strange thing. Sometimes you get this feeling, oh, it's the fastest growing sport in the world. But when you get up close, there really isn't as huge a demand for fighting outside of the UFC as people think.
Mm-hmm.
The one change and difference in that right now, I think, is Bellator and Viacom, because they're on Spike, and there's executives there who promoted MMA for 6 or 8 years. They know what they're doing. Viacom has the money. Bellator's run the business. They're in a position to, you know, if not be the Pepsi to the Coke, at least be Dr. Pepper.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I don't know, man. It's going to be tough. I mean, if you're the World Series of Fighting, how do you compete with Bellator right now? If I got a guy and it's between those two, it's like, well, on Bellator, you're in front of 800,000 people a week on Spike TV.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but there's room for everything. I think the World Series of Fighting may do pretty well this year.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised at all by the John Fitch release? Because there were a lot of people out there that were screaming their heads off, like, you know, this is like the worst thing that's ever happened. You know, how can you cut a guy who's a top 10 guy in the world, great record in the UFC? Or did you kind of see this coming? You know, they got the guys over from Strikeforce there, and obviously with all those injuries they had, there were so many guys on the roster because they had so many spots that needed to be filled with all those injuries that happened. So they were overrun as it was, and then they brought the guys in for Strikeforce, and now their roster is just humongous.
You can't just keep acquiring.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
mm-hmm.
like you acquire because one, they look good and you want them, whether it's a fighter or a grocery store or whatever the business is acquiring. You acquire them because you'd like to have them, but you also acquire things so that other people can't have them.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at Strikeforce and you go, you know, obviously you want the 10 best guys here, but are there 10 more that could be of value to our competitor? Oh, there are? Oh, shit, we better sign them then.
Mm-hmm.
Better sign them and, you know, at least give them a fight or two. And if they can't cut it in the UFC and our competitor signs them, we've devalued them a little bit. I mean, it's all just real basic art of war business thinking. But you can't just acquire forever. I mean, you only need 380 fighters and you have 470.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a problem. The guys are going to have to get that go. But the sort of aspect of me who's always behind the fighters and who are, you know, always thinks that they need to be protected and taken care of, feels shitty about it. It's like, John Fitch worked his ass off for our company for a decade. Like,
mm-hmm.
you know, you feel bad about that for him. But then when you see Dana White talk, you go, from a business standpoint, he's on the downside. He's never had the highest amount of fans. There's an argument about his style. Personally,
mm-hmm.
I fucking love watching a John Fitch fight.
Yeah, me too.
Dominant, he's brilliant, you know, he's smart, he's gritty. He'd be the last guy you'd ever want to fight. It would hurt every second of it as you felt the burning in your lungs and the lactic acid in your muscles as he slowly beats you down. That'd be awful. I love watching that. But from their perspective, they don't see the value, and then they say, well, we pay him so much, it's a few $100,000 by the time he gets a win bonus and some other stuff, and we don't know if he's worth keeping on undercards as he loses fights. Well, you know, there's some truth to that. But I'll always swing in favor of the fighter. You know, it's like
mm-hmm.
these guys, some of these guys are going to just have painful 40s and 50s in their lives. You know, mm-hmm. they're going to have painful, aching, sore, you know, and some of them haven't made a lot of money. And these guys, you got to protect the warriors. You got to protect mm-hmm. the guys who put the show on. So I'm behind that, you know, but I don't know, but at the same time, business. You can't have 470 guys.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's been a lot of talk about super fights, Anderson Silva, GSP, Anderson Silva, John Jones. First, which is the one that you want to see? And second, which is the one that you think will actually happen?
I think I'd prefer to see George mm-hmm. and Anderson Silva. Mm-hmm. It depends. I mean, there's so many variables in them. Like Anderson Silva, in 2 years of aging, plus John Jones in 2 more years of improving, mm-hmm. I think Jones will win that fight then. Mm-hmm. I think if the fight happened today, Anderson Silva has a shot. You know, I think even the biggest issue is the biggest guy will usually win. Mm-hmm. If you go up to a higher weight class, you know, the weight difference and the power difference is a problem. Anderson Silva's fought a lot of 205-pound guys and been fine. So, you know, I think right now he'd be a bit of a favorite over John Jones because of experience, but I think 2 years of him slowing down and 2 years of John Jones getting better, and I think John Jones wins that fight. I think if George St. Pierre and Faraz they're too smart. They're not going to go up and weigh, maybe they'd say 170. When it came down to it, they'd agree to 173 or 174 or something.
Sure.
But they're going to stick with 170. If Anderson Silva came down to 170, I think George beats him. And I think he beats him the way that we all imagine him to. You know, with his hands real high, and, you know, try to either slip or catch the first punch, or just duck under it, time him under a left hook or something, and shoot, put him on the ground, beat him up. Chael Sonnen him for 25 minutes instead of 23 like Chael did. And I think he could win that fight. But at 180 or something, I think he would have problems. I don't think he'd be as explosive. And I don't know if he'd be able to get the takedown so cleanly. And so, I don't know. I don't know if any of them will happen, to be honest. It all makes sense. It's all fun to talk about. But, you know, who wants to go up and wait and fight another dominant guy at risk of no longer being considered the very, very best? I mean, I wouldn't.
Sure,
if you've made 10 or 15 million already, you know, and somebody's offering you $3 million to take that risk, some guys won't do it, you know? So I don't know.
And then you got to factor in the perception. If one of them loses, then that belt it has a little bit of a, you know, kind of a dark cloud over it in a sense, because, you know, the other champion in another weight class beat that guy. So I don't know. It just kind of I'm not a big fan of super fights. Then maybe it doesn't. All it does is make people interested in the loser's next fight, and I don't know if it hurts you. But if you say it was at a weight, like say it was 170 and Silva came down, that should be for the welterweight title. The welterweight fight against the welterweight champion. I mean, you know, and then if that was the case, that would be really cool. But I don't know. No, these things, unless they're willing to make a phone call and say, we want to do the stadium, and we have a flat $10 million check for you, George and Anderson, are you in? Unless they're in a position to do that, and hey man, in the 60,000 seat stadium, the math works out that they definitely could do that easily. Then maybe it'll happen. But right now, nobody's all that desperate to go up in the upper weight class and fight, you know, one of the best guys in the world. Right. Now, Showtime, they're out of the MMA game for right now. Floyd Mayweather, he just signed with Showtime. Do you get the feeling now that Showtime might not be back in MMA, or do you think that they're just, you know, going to beef up their boxing and then they're still having plans of coming back to MMA?
Yeah, smart point there. That's exactly what I kind of think, is that maybe you're looking at it, and okay, here's Showtime, and they've had some success with MMA, you know, over the years. They've had, you know, huge shows, 800,000, 900,000, million, you know, shows where people, you know, will tune in and watch Gina Carano, or even some of the shows that you didn't think were going to be that huge will do 600,000 and 700,000 viewers. So they've had success, and, you know, they have Laurel there, who's an expert, and, you know, is one of the top voices, and they have a team of people, and people understand it. So they could do it, but I'll bet you, and I have no inside information on this other than using my own experience through kind of walking through this to guesstimate, but I can imagine them going out and making some phone calls when they said, well, we're going to look and see what else is out there. And I'm sure they talked to Invicta, which would be cool, and it would be, and they talked to 2 or 3 others. I don't know if they talked to Legacy or RFA or who they talked to, but they talked to some. And during these conversations, these guys who have a lot of experience on the lip and said, do we really want to get into a scenario where we're dealing with 5 or 6 of these people, and there aren't 5 or 6 elite level business minds running 5 or 6 shows out there? There's a few. And Invicta is one of them. You know, Shannon Knapp is super legit. And what she's doing over there is super legit. But they wouldn't just run an entirely female thing unless it was one of 4 shows. You know, maybe they're running, you know, a show every 2 weeks, and every 4th one is Invicta, and the other ones are other shows. You're playing around with it, and you're going, we could do that. You could play in this ballpark, which requires a lot of man hours, a lot of learning on the fly, a lot of risk taking, for where we're in business with a bunch of people who, if any of their own business ends start to collapse, we're doing something with, you know, XYZ fighting. Oh, wait, they lost their financing. Oh, wait, they lost their main event. You're so reliant on other people. Or you could go for tried and true, make a big pitch for Mayweather, and go in that route and start talking into the tens of millions with high-level people, the best people in the business. and that's what they did. So that doesn't mean they're not going to do MMA, but like I said earlier about MMA being the lowest on the totem pole for a lot of television executives, when in one hand you have the Mayweather and the tried and true Showtime boxing that Morrow calls now, and he is fantastic on it. And then on the other hand, you have all these kind of like, on-the-fly MMA guys, which one are you going to go with?
Sure.
And by the way, when Morrow first called Showtime boxing, apparently, what's his name, Oscar De La Hoya emailed the boss of Showtime, and they forwarded Morrow the emailed the boss of Showtime and said, I don't know where you found this guy, but he is fantastic. He's the best new commentator we've heard. Now, Oscar didn't have as much exposure to him in MMA,
right.
But for Morrow to just step into boxing and floor everybody, including Oscar De La Hoya, is so cool. I'm so happy for him.
Yeah, definitely. Good to see him doing well outside MMA as well. So good to get some crossover too.
Yeah.
Robin, just to finish on, I want to play a little bit of a game with you. I want you to predict the future for some of these fighters. And I want you to tell me where they end up and why they end up there. First, let's start with Rampage Jackson. Where does he end up and why?
The next couple of years are not going to be the best years of Rampage's life from a fighting business standpoint. I mean, Bellator doesn't have, they have the money for him, but is there really a need for him? And do they want to be identified as the people who take the UFC's cast-offs?
Right,
if you're going to take the UFC's cast-offs and pay him $100,000 to fight, I don't know if they're going to do that. World Series of Fighting might be able to pay him $50,000, and it might be worth it for them. So I could see him ending up there. Or if there's something in Japan, there's a bit of a resurgence in Japan that would make sense. Wherever he goes, it'll be one and done or two, and he'll end up doing a little more movies. He'll exist in tabloid, MMA tabloid things as he makes some bad references to Dana White and some other stuff. But I think his years of relevant positioning are over. He's still a fascinating dude. Everybody would love to see him do well. If he can have a night where he can go in and be old Rampage, that'd be fantastic. I'll be thrilled to see it, but I kind of think maybe he's over this now. So you might see him at World Series fighting, you might see him in Japan, one fight, maybe two, and he'll kind of go on to other stuff, I think.
Next up, an interesting guy, because World Series of Fighting boss Ray Sefo trains with him at Extreme Couture, and Bellator, he has experience with them because he fought for the welterweight title, lost a controversial decision to Ben Askren. Jay Haran, where does he end up?
Jay Haran will be at Bellator, and it'll be announced within the next week.
Okay.
I can tell you that's what's going down. And while looking at him, among the reasons they signed him, he's relevant, it's important. You go back to the Askren thing, he's going there. I can tell you within a week or 10 days he'll be announced. And there will be conversations about him and Fitch. And Fitch, the reason is that he's still in the conversation is because, you look at Bailey, there's going to be Huron, there's Askren. You got to look at Fitch. You got to seriously have a Bellator conversation about Fitch, and they are having that conversation. They're saying they're not, but I know they are.
Okay, next up, Josh Barnett.
Man, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one because Josh Barnett is so cool and like such a world adventurer. He approaches his life like an adventure. He doesn't necessarily make business moves or savvy moves in the category that other people look at it. He makes moves based on what will be awesome. What do I think will be awesome? So he's very hard to predict. I could see him headlining a World Series of Fighting event, but he's also expensive. So it'll either be World Series of Fighting will announce that they're going to do something with him within the next 2 or 3 months, or he'll, slide off for 8 or 9 months and go do his own thing and chill out and have some other fun and some other adventures in his life, maybe do some wrestling, and then the landscape will change and something will come up for him in Japan or somewhere. But there's one of those two options, I think.
And next up, a guy who had a very good UFC record. He beat a lot of good guys when he dropped down to 155, started off a little bit slow when he was at 170. Jacob Volkman, where does he end up?
Jacob Volkman, like you look, I don't know. It's a couple of organizations in Minnesota, and if any of them can pay him $8,000 for a fight against somebody who's willing to take it because they know it would be cool to say you're fighting Jacob Wolfman. You could see him in some Minnesota organization. I don't think he'll be in a hurry to do anything. Or World Series fighting again. I mean, I don't know that Bellator really needs it, and World Series of Fighting, they may six shows a year is a lot of shows, and they have to find the right balance of young guys that they can develop themselves, like what's his name would be Miguel Torres, or be willing to do a little bit of repurposing of guys, and Jacob Volkman would be one of those guys.
And now the last guy, possibly the hardest to predict because there's a court case involving a contract situation with him. Eddie Alvarez, where does he end up?
Eddie Alvarez will probably be rematching Chandler before summer. I mean, he's going to lose that case, and I don't think, I'm surprised anyone even went for it. I feel like the poor guy is being screwed by lawyers because, you can look at that and go, you're not going to win this. Everybody would look at that and say that, except for a lawyer who wants to get paid. The fact is, if I sign a deal with Sony Records, and let's say I sign a deal with Fight Club Music, and I'm only saying that because there's a poster for Fight Club here, so I'm just using that. And so I signed Fight Club Records, and Fight Club in my contract says we have the right to match anything. And I go and I see Sony, and Sony offers me a huge thing. If what Sony's offering me is potentially 10% of this, and in advance of that, they don't put any actual numbers on there, or they don't put any numbers that Fight Club Records can't match. Fight Club Records just changes the name from Sony to Fight Club Records and matches it. And there's no argument. Their argument, the legal argument is, well, they're saying that they'll give me, 2% of pay-per-views just like the UFC, but they don't have pay-per-view. Yeah, but they're not. They're saying that they will give you 2% of any pay-per-views they'll do in the future. So they don't have to have done any to make this a legally binding document. If they do them, they will give you 2%. And it's that across the board. I mean, there's just, from the day I saw that, you don't have to match the projections or the possibilities. They just have to match the wording. And that's what they did. So he's going to lose that case. And some lawyers are probably going to make a bunch of $1,000 off him, which was really sad to see. And Eddie Alvarez is one of my favorite fighters, and I'd love to see him fighting in the UFC. Hopefully we will at some point. But in the meantime, he should just go in and fight Chandler and, try to get his title back and be a star there. I mean, there's a lot of people watching Bellator, and Bellator's growing. And personally, I think their reality show is likely to not be very good. So that's going to be a bit of a step, and I say that because when you look at the Ultimate Fighter now, it's so modern and it has that film look and it's super slick, and it feels like UFC prime time. And Fox has spent big money on it. It's 2014. It's like 2015. It's like it's documentary style, high level reality. Well, by the time that came out and the Bellator people were watching it, they're probably 4 months or 5 months into shooting something that looks very much like, that tattoo show. Whatever that tattoo one is called.
Ink Master.
Ink Master. You can't compare Ink Master and the new Ultimate Fighter. You just can't do it. The quality is not there. And Ink Master is their kind of prototype, and they took it from the early days of the UFC prototype. So they're going to be making a reality show based on 2009. And here we have the future. It's just not going to be good, I don't think. But, so that'll be a bit of a setback. But right now, Bellator's on a roll. They're doing good.
Everyone thinks that Eddie Alvarez is going to sign with the UFC, but I just don't see it. They obviously matched, and they're talking about pay-per-view, but Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler, that is a pay-per-view fight. They could sell that. I don't know what they would charge for it, but people would buy that. I'd buy it.
Yeah, I would too. It's just from a legal standpoint. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I've signed contracts in music and contracts in fighting and seeing, and I'm curious about everything. And so, I did some digging and did some researching and just didn't look here. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer, and neither are you, and neither are any of, the nerds among us that debate these kinds of things. But when you look at it, you go, man, I wouldn't go and spend $14,000 fighting this. It looks pretty ironclad. I think we're going to lose,
Yeah, sure.
So it's unfortunate for Eddie. I'd love, like, I mean, just think of all the great fights. Like, give him somebody challenging, but not, somebody he could lose to or he could beat, to test him. He comes in and fights Joe Lozon first,
Sure.
and then Jim Miller, and then the title, like, or you come in and you have him fight Pettis, like, just, oh man, like, how many great fights would there be for him? But I think he's going to be a Bellator, man.
Right. Good stuff, Robin. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it was a long one.
No problem, man. It's a pleasure to hang with you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. So,
me too.
Thanks for coming on and doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Let's do it again sometime, man.